Drugs have been smuggled into the U.S. in a variety of ways, but surprisingly, the largest amount of fentanyl seized by Border Patrol officials was found among cucumbers in a produce truck. What's even more surprising is that this bust happened at a very heavily guarded checkpoint. Today, I will discuss similarities and differences among news sources reporting on this record-breaking fentanyl bust. Many people watch the news to stay well informed, but are unaware that news sources can contain political bias in an attempt to push political agendas and ideas on their viewers. As a young adult, politics are beginning to affect my life. I have developed a political opinion because of this. Sometimes it is easy for me to skim over bias if it supports my beliefs. I have learned that evaluating multiple sources allows you to locate bias easier and faster and find the best possible news source. This speech will address the fentanyl news story, we'll discuss the varying news coverage, and we'll analyze the facts and bias of all of the news stories together. Now, let's summarize this record-breaking bust. On January 26, 2019, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials experienced the largest seizure of fentanyl in U.S. history. The drug was found smuggled under cucumbers at an Arizona checkpoint, which is along the U.S.-Mexico border. 250 pounds of fentanyl was seized, which is worth about $3.5 million. 395 pounds of methamphetamine was also found, which is worth about $1.1 million. In this picture, you can see that this is fentanyl and this is meth. The previous record was about 118 pounds, which means that this recent seizure of fentanyl is about twice the size of the previous record. This raises concerns for many Americans, as fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine. It was responsible for more than 28,400 fatal overdoses in 2017, and 29% of this total 63,000 overdoses in 2016 were related to fentanyl. Fentanyl continues to be the center of the current opioid crisis in America. Now that we understand the event, let's evaluate 4 separate news sources. Although the facts remain the same throughout all of the news stories, delivery of these facts has varied among the evaluated sources. NBC's article, written by Pete Williams, states all of the facts of the situation. This article is also very brief and to the point. The article states directly that 254 pounds of fentanyl was seized and that fentanyl is worth about $3.5 million. This article also mentions that this was the biggest bust in U.S. history. These facts remain fluid throughout all of the news articles. The Huffington Post's coverage, written by Sebastian Murdoch, begins with the same facts that were mentioned in Williams' article. The difference lies in the fact that he points out that Donald Trump stated that the drugs from Mexico are pouring into the U.S., but not through ports of entry, which is what is creating a need for a border wall. He rebukes this by saying that seizure occurred at this U.S. checkpoint and that most drugs are found here. Washington Post article, written by Nick Muroff, is very similar to Murdoch's article. Muroff also criticizes Donald Trump for his same words. Muroff discussed in more detail about the dangers of fentanyl than Murdoch did. Lastly, Fox 10 Phoenix also covered this story. Anita Snow, who wrote the article, mentioned the same exact facts that were in all 3 of the other articles. She concluded that the man driving the truck was Mexican, even though various other news sources reported that his identity was unknown at the time. She also used heavily the word Mexican, with much of this usage carrying a very negative connotation. The differences between these articles highlight how necessary it is to closely read and evaluate news sources for bias. It is best to evaluate a wide range of sources in order to pick up bias very easily. Laura K. Kaiser and Dennis O'Connor wrote an article for the New Jersey Institute of Technology about identifying bias. They suggest some questions to ask yourself before you read the news. And some of these questions include, what is the author's political point of view? What does the author stand to gain? Who is paying for this website? And lastly, does the author present alternative points of view? It is important to keep these in mind before diving into news sources looking for bias. NBC's article was the least biased out of the 4. This article avoids bias and purely states the facts of the situation. It appears that Williams was almost trying to avoid bias in his article. Perhaps this is because of the current controversy that lies between Mexico and this border wall proposal. Huffington Post and Washington Post are both very liberal news sources, and it's important to keep that in mind before reading their news. Both sources attacked Donald Trump's border wall proposal and neglected the fentanyl news story towards the end, creating a very heavy liberal bias. This bias is intended to sway an audience to dislike Donald Trump and his current border wall proposal. Fox News' article does the complete opposite, giving the word Mexican a very negative connotation to sway people to support Donald Trump and his border wall proposal. Fox News tends to be a very conservative news source, so this is not surprising. The news that Fox 10 reported on supports this continuous conservative bias. Hopefully, you have learned a bit about this news story, as well as how to identify bias in news stories. By having an awareness of the story, comparing news sources, and evaluating these sources, you as a reader can make sure you are receiving unbiased news. By doing these things, you can take away valuable information from news sources without outside influence.